Alright, so what's up everyone and welcome back to the channel. Now today we're going to be covering the best guns in Warzone for Season 3 after the most recent weapon tuning updates. Now, we're going to be covering a range of weapons here today. We're talking about assault rifles, SMGs, LMGs, pretty much anything you can think of in today's meta. Alongside talking about the best weapons in the game, which is today's priority, I will also talk about how I would pair these weapons as well. So basically just class setup recommendations. This current meta has so many weapons outside of what we talk about today. There's probably 20 to 30 plus guns that are actually viable, so if you don't see a gun in today's list, it doesn't mean it's not good or I don't consider it to be good. It's just that there's so many to talk about, it's ridiculous to just have one video talking about them. Now, just before we get into today's video, if you are new around here, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We are around about 70 subscribers away from hitting 1,000 subs, so thank you to everyone who shows their support on my channel if you've been subscribed for a short time or if you've been here for years or however long it's been. I really appreciate your support, and if you are new around here, once again, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video of mine. But with that out of the way, let's get right into the video. So all the weapons that we talk about in today's video will be split into 4 different weapon categories. So the first one is long range, so this is going to be longer range assault rifles, LMGs, you know, that sort of stuff. We have the close range section, which is going to be, you know, like your shorter range assault rifles, your SMGs, shotguns, which we're not going to talk about today. And then we have the sniper rifle section, which obviously just has sniper rifles, very self-explanatory. And finally, we have the sniper support, which are the weapons that I would personally recommend using alongside a sniper. Generally speaking, sniper support mainly contains assault rifles. It's basically the bridge between the long range and the close range category. They're the very sort of versatile weapons, so that's what you'd want to use alongside a sniper rifle. Now, we're going to talk quickly about how I would pair these things before we actually talk about the weapons. So it's kind of self-explanatory. The long range and the close range you want in one class setup, and sniper rifle and sniper support you want in one class setup as well. You just have those two categories sort of joining together. It makes the most sense, really. For example, there wouldn't be any reason whatsoever to use a Kar 98 alongside a CR56 AMAX, you know what I mean? Or you wouldn't use a MAC 10 and an MP5 in the same class setup, unless you want to limit yourself that strictly, which fair enough, but that's generally how you'd want to go about building your class setup. So with that out of the way, let's just get right into the list, and in no particular order, we're going to start with the CR56 AMAX. Now, this is one of the best rifles in the game, if not the best. It is argued that it could be the best. It did recently catch a nerf, which did slightly reduce its effectiveness and range, but in my opinion, it didn't completely destroy the gun. I think Raven mentioned in their patch notes that it reduces the effectiveness by about 17% or so, which is just a good enough nerf to sort of put the weapon in check. It doesn't destroy it once again. This is definitely still one of the best guns in the game, probably the best. But in my opinion, it could do with a recoil nerf, just to make it a little more skillful to use. It doesn't really have crazy recoil, and I still don't think it warrants the time to kill that it has, but it is a little more skillful to use than, say, a Grau or an M4. It definitely does have more recoil that is noticeable, but I think it could do a little bit more to make it a little more skillful to use. Next up, we have the M4A1. In my opinion, the M4 is probably one of the best options for long ranges at the moment, alongside the AMAX. It has very manageable recoil, it has a very competitive time to kill, a forgiving fire rate, a 60-round mag. This gun literally just has everything you want to have a long-range assault rifle, and obviously this one is sort of like a throwback once again, because this was the meta sort of when Warzone came out, and it just kind of got outclassed by a lot of things. You know, as metas changed and as people started using different guns, this gun kind of got forgotten about, which is a shame. Because this gun is still one of the best, but I could see this thing making a comeback, which would be really cool. Here we have the only LMG on this list, and this is the Stoner 63. I haven't seen this weapon much at all, even though it is really powerful. Like, this thing's time to kill is actually ridiculous. The build I have on it makes it really good for the longer ranges because of its effective range, its recoil, its mag capacity. But I like to use the fast mag on the magazine, basically because it has enough ammo stock, and you don't really need to use an extended mag, and we want to consider the fact as well that it is an LMG, so it's going to be a lot slower than, say, an assault rifle, so you don't want to hurt the ADS speed too much. I think people will probably be turned off to using the Stoner 63 because it is an LMG, you know, slower mobility, it's a very sort of clunky weapon, which is why I usually pair it with something like a MAC 10, something that has great mobility. But it does warrant the slow sort of mobility that this weapon has, because it is really powerful. So if you haven't given this a try, I highly recommend it. This thing is very underrated, and we're going to see a lot of the word underrated in this video, because there's a lot of underrated weapons. Okay, so next up we have one of my favorite weapons in the game. This is the Grau 5.56. This gun is... oh my god, it's so beautiful. It doesn't have the best time to kill in the game, or it doesn't have anything special about it. It's just so easy to use. It's just so smooth. It has, you know, it has great handling. It has clean iron sights, the best iron sights in COD, changed my mind. It has basically no recoil. It has a really competitive time to kill. It's just such a nice gun to use, you know what I mean? It's just really easy to use. There's not any magnification, but it still feels like it can beam people at ranges, which I love the iron sights on this thing. And overall, the Grau is just a really nice gun to use, I would say. This is, once again, sort of a throwback. The Grau, honestly, I wouldn't sleep on this thing. It is really good. The main reason why I think this is good is because of its ease to use instead of its time to kill. But it doesn't have a bad time to kill. Don't get me wrong. It still has a very good time to kill. So if you don't use the Grau, then I would recommend it. Next up, we have an option which I've seen quite a bit of talk about recently, and that is the Ram 7. I do think this thing is still quite underrated. I mean, I see people on YouTube and, you know, social media talking about this thing quite a bit, but I don't really see many people using it in-game, which is a shame because it has a really good time to kill. I mean, it's not AMAX levels. I don't think many things are AMAX levels, but it is still one of the best killing assault rifles in the game. It has a really forgiving fire rate, but it only has a 50 round mag, which is not as good as 60, but I mean, it's still usable. It's surprisingly doesn't have a lot of recoil. It's very easy to handle, but the one drawback, in my opinion, with the Ram 7 is its range. It doesn't feel as good as other assault rifles at range. To be honest, it might be worth using this thing as like a sniper support sort of weapon, or an SMG type weapon. I've never tried using it as an SMG, but I don't know. It just feels like sometimes at ranges it just kind of shoots peas. I'm not really sure. Compared to weapons like the Grau, the M4 anyway, but it's still a very good weapon at range. But it might be worth trying to use it as an SMG, so give it a go if you haven't. So finally, in this long range section of the video, we have the Krig 6. Now, this is a weapon that was recently buffed. It was buffed during the Season 3 update. This thing is definitely a contender for the top spot in Warzone. I've been seeing this weapon quite a lot recently compared to before, when it was just never used, essentially, and I can understand why. It's just overall just a really reliable assault rifle. It doesn't have a lot of recoil. It has a good time to kill. It has a forgiving fire rate, 60 round mags, not bad hand. It has everything. Once again, it's like the M4 in the sense where it's just overall just a really reliable and just sort of does everything rifles. So yeah, I don't really have much else to say about it. It's just a very good assault rifle. Okay, so that closes up the long range section of this video. Now we're going to talk about close range options. And the first one is the MP5. And this is both the Cold War and Modern Warfare MP5. I know a lot of people would say that the Cold War one is technically better, and I know it is. But the differences are so minuscule that you can pretty much use either one. It is mainly down to preference. Now, the Cold War weapon has a better time to kill. It can have a higher round mag. But the differences lie with the Modern Warfare one, where it has better recoil. It just has overall better handling. It feels a lot better. I feel like it is also a little bit easier to use. Like, the Cold War one is sort of like, if you want a little bit more recoil and you want a better time to kill, then you use the Cold War one. But despite that, I think the Modern Warfare one is just, I just agree with it better, if that makes sense. It just feels a lot better to use. But once again, I can understand why people would use the Cold War one over it. I'll have both setups on screen, obviously, so you can pick and choose. The Cold War one, it seems like you can experiment a lot more with. You can use a barrel, you can use no stock, you can use a Raider stock, Serpent Wrap, you know, lots of different options, it feels like, with it. It's not really like most guns where it's like a defined setup, but overall, both MP5s are great. The differences are minimal, so I just think it's preference, to be honest. Next up here, we have the MAC 10. Now, even though this gun did catch a nerf in Season 3, which will probably put some people off, it is still a contender for one of the top SMGs in the game. The nerf did reduce its time to kill by a slight margin. I think it needs one more bullet to kill. But the main reason that people still use this thing is because of its insanely good mobility and its really high fire rate as well. This gun is definitely still a popular choice for people because its time to kill is definitely still competitive, and the main reason, the main selling point of the MAC-10 is its mobility. You just move really quick with this thing. It's actually insane, and I've seen a lot of people recently using just completely mobility-focused setups of the MAC-10, which makes you move just incredibly quick, but I'm not one that, I don't really see the point of that. Its mobility is good enough to kind of leave stock, if that makes sense. This is the main reason why I like to run this thing alongside the Stoner 63, is because of that mobility. Because the Stoner is a very slow weapon, we talked about that earlier, but the MAC-10 is just so quick. It's basically like they're opposites of each other sort of thing, but there isn't really much else to say. This gun's been popular since the integration first happened, so I think most people know by now why it is good. Now, speaking of the MAC-10, we have, in my opinion, the Modern Warfare MAC-10, which is the Fennec. I don't see many people talking about this gun. I think it is heavily underrated. Since the MAC-10 nerf, I think this thing could and probably should take its place. This weapon, like I said, is pretty much the Modern Warfare MAC-10, but the only difference is really the mobility. The main reason I say it's the Modern Warfare MAC-10 is because of that insanely good fire rate. It kind of reminds me of the MAC-10, but the Fennec is a little slower than the MAC-10. It's quite a slow weapon to use because of the build I've got on it. The MAC-10 is just insanely quick though, but the drum mag and the barrel definitely slow this weapon down. But in my opinion, it is definitely worth it for the time to kill. I may try different setups for the Fennec to have more movement speed orientated builds, because this one is very... you can definitely notice the difference in mobility compared to other SMGs, but hopefully more people start to use this weapon, because I just think it is insanely good. Here's another insanely good SMG that recently caught a nerf though. This is the Bullfrog. Now, I really like this weapon because it comes with a high mag capacity as stock, which means you don't have to use an attachment slot on the magazine, and you can use that pretty much anywhere else. Now, this weapon is just overall a great SMG, and it's similar to the MAC-10 where you can have a really good mobility on it. These two I would say are quite unique. The MAC-10 is probably a little bit quicker than the Bullfrog, but you can have more of a mobility orientated build on the Bullfrog as well, which is just great. Alongside that though, it doesn't really have a lot of recoil, and it has clean iron sights, so you don't have to use an attachment slot on the iron sights, which is great. This is another weapon that, once again, I said this earlier, did get nerfed, but not that much. You know, people hear that a gun gets nerfed and they kind of get turned off to using the weapon. But it barely got nerfed. It just reduced its effectiveness a tiny bit, so I wouldn't be put off using this weapon because it is still very good. Now, finally here for SMGs, we have the PPSH. Now, I bet a lot of people were expecting the LC10 to be on this list. I do like the LC10. It isn't on this list at all. But that, I would say, comes under the role of sniper support, in my opinion, just because of its versatility. But anyway, we're talking about the PPSH here. This thing definitely is, I would say, a really good gun. It recently caught a buff, which has made it very competitive. But the thing is with this gun, it's basically like the MAC-10's little brother. It can have a lot more ammo than the MAC-10. I think it's about 18 more bullets. Yeah, it can have up to 71, which is the build that I have on here. But the time to kill is, I think, a little bit slower than the MAC-10, so it's basically like, if you want more ammo, then use this. If you want a better gun, then use the MAC-10. But this is, I would say, just a nice alternative if you want to have a change of pace. The PPSH is definitely still a very good gun. But I feel like the main thing with this thing, like the selling point, is its ammo capacity, because it is insanely high. So that wraps it up for the close range section. Now we're going to go on to the sniper rifle section, which is literally just one gun, because there's no reason to use any other gun. Let's all say it together in 3, 2, 1. The Kar 98K. I mean, obviously this is the best sniper to use in Warzone. You can use things like the Tundra, the SPR, the HDR, but I think 95% of people who snipe definitely use the Kar 98. It's just the best all-round weapon for sniping. I mean, you could use the SPR in its place. It has a slightly higher bullet velocity, but it is a little bit slower, more clunky. The HDR and Tundra are kind of like in their own ballpark, because you use them for, I think, standard Warzone. The bullet velocity on them is just, like, much higher, but they're a lot slower. But I feel like that's why people tend to stick with the Kar 98 anyway, because it's just a really quick sniper, and it's just great all around. There's a good bullet velocity. You know, it's got a clear scope, blah, blah, blah. I could talk about this, you know, quite a lot, but I'm not going to, because we all know why it's good. So my final section here is the sniper support section. Now, the first weapon in this, my personal favorite sniper support weapon, this is the AS Val. This weapon is highly underrated for Warzone. If you've been subscribed to the channel for a while, you know that I've talked about this thing a lot. I talk about this thing all the time. This thing has the quickest time to kill in the game, by the way, just so you know. It's around about 400 milliseconds, I'm pretty sure. But the main thing with this thing is a very low mag capacity, and this is why people tend to stay away from it. You need to be a lot more careful and skillful with your shots because of that 30-round mag. You call reloading quite a lot, but I like this weapon alongside a sniper. It's kind of like something to fall back on, you know what I mean? You're not going to run into a room and take on a quad with the AS value. It's something to fall back on. Like, if your team gets pushed by a team, you can kind of defend yourself, sort of thing, but it's not something that you'd use to take on more than 2 people, because that 30-round mag is very limiting. This weapon would be a great option for solos, because 30 rounds to take out 1 person is really good. Like, that's all you need. So if you play solos, this is an insanely good pick. But if you're playing quads, I wouldn't use it as an SMG. You could get away with it in solos, but in sort of quads, trios, or even duos, it's a little harder to justify its position as an SMG. So, just 2 more weapons to go now. The first one is the AK-47. This is the Cold War one. The Modern Warfare one is useless. This is another weapon that got a buff in Season 3, which has made it a very viable option in Warzone. The thing that definitely still holds this thing back is its recoil, which is definitely a good thing. This is sort of its limiting factor, like the Val's ammo capacity. If this thing had no recoil, it would the game would be fucked, essentially. But this gun has a really good time to kill, but it has a slow fire rate, which I think people don't really tend to like slower fire rates, because if you miss 1 shot with a gun that has like 900 plus RPM, that's fine, because you're shooting tons of bullets down range. But if you miss a bullet on, say, like this or an Odin, it's a lot more of a devastating hit than, say, you know, like a Grau or something, if that makes sense. But because of that recoil, that limiting factor, this thing definitely fills the role of the close to mid-range assault rifle, which is basically what sniper support is. It does have a hefty amount of recoil once again, but if you master this thing, you can dominate people at close to mid and maybe pushing long range. But if you're using it alongside a sniper, then there's sort of no reason to push long range with this thing. But anyway, that's enough about the AK. The final gun on this list is the FARA 83. Now, this is once again one of the biggest surprises with the Season 3 update. This gun was basically useless before. This thing got a decent buff to its recoil, though, which makes it a very good weapon to use for the close to medium ranges. And once again, maybe pushing longer ranges as well, which is why I think it's better on sniper support, because it's sort of better in the close to medium ranges as opposed to long ranges. I mean, you could use this thing for long range, I guess, but you do a lot better with the options we talked about before than this gun. This gun doesn't have an insanely quick time to kill or anything amazing about it. The main thing about it is just its versatility. I mean, you can use it at close range, you can use it at long range, use it at medium range. It's just overall a really good weapon. I mean, you would definitely kill quicker than SMG rather than this gun at like closer ranges, but once you start to get to like the medium and pushing longer ranges for this gun, you will outgun SMGs easily, and that's the main thing with this thing, once again, is its versatility. It's worth mentioning as well that the 50-round mags give you 60-round mags instead, which is okay, I guess. I mean, it's 10 more rounds, so that's pretty cool, I guess. But that will probably be fixed soon if it hasn't been fixed already. But anyway, that's going to do it for today's video. This has been a really long one, I know, but there are just so many viable options for Warzone, and this meta has just been so refreshing compared to the Season 1, Season 2, where it's just complete, utter cancer. But this meta is just so much better, just to talk about all these different guns, and the fact that there are more than this as well that are definitely viable is just really cool. So that's going to do it for today's video. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like and also subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.